Okay, great. Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining today's presentation, Surviving Audits and Regulators for Banks and Credit Unions. Presenting today, we have Wayne Sadin. He's a member of the Infrascale Advisory Board. He's been in financial services technology since 1979. We also have presenting Ken Shaw. He's the founder and CEO of Infrascale. He's an experienced engineer and entrepreneur in the recovery industry. Taking a look at the agenda today, first we're going to talk about some of those pain points that you may have experienced. We'll talk about DRaaS, Disaster Recovery as a Service, the benefits that you have with DRaaS. We're going to talk about ransomware then and now. And then finally we'll have the Q&A, and we're going to have a prize giveaway. So all you have to do in order to be eligible for that prize giveaway is ask lots of relevant and on-topic questions. So please be sure to do that throughout the entire presentation using that question tool, and then you'll be eligible for that prize giveaway. A couple of quick housekeeping announcements before I pass it over to Wayne. We'd love for you to join the conversation. So you can find us on Twitter at Infrascale. You can use the hashtag DRaaS and BDR. I'm also frequently asked if there's a copy of the slides available. So I do want to let you know you can grab a copy of those slides in the handout section now. I've put them in there for you. And then also, if you'd like to view a recording of this presentation, you'll be able to get that at infrascale.com/webinars within the next 24 hours. So with all the housekeeping out of the way, what I'm going to do now is pass it over to Wayne. So Wayne, take it away.
Thank you very much, Carla. I really appreciate the chance to talk to the audience here. As you heard, I've been around IT and financial services since 1979. I've been a CIO, a CTO, a Chief Digital Officer, and in that almost 40 years, I've worked with regulators, internal auditors, external auditors of almost every type and in the United States and many other countries. So I'm going to start by talking about the pain points. And really, we're going to talk about from the perspective of not just the CIO, but the perspective of the IT organization and the bank or credit union as a whole. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see that the CIO, who is seen as a very powerful person if you aspire to that job, is actually a person in a position of remarkably little power. As the CIO, I am reporting to a CEO most typically, board of directors, and around me is the CFO and the Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Risk Officer, Chief Compliance Officer, General Auditor, General Counsel, and so on. And so when we talk about the need for compliance and keeping regulators happy, it's really an effort that has to be made by everybody. We are in this together. And while this is a technical problem, it is really a problem in perception, a problem in explanation, a problem in understanding. So when we talk about the environment we live in, we're governed by some acronyms. We're going to talk about two of them right now. The first is FFIEC, the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, next slide, is an interagency group that prescribes uniform principles for governing the supervision of financial institutions. And if anybody's been doing this for any length of time, you've run into FFIEC pronouncements and standards. So we are, as IT people, as regulators, as credit officers, and so on, all dependent on FFIEC to kind of outline how we should do our job. And the other thing that's important to know, and many IT people may not be aware of it, is the CAMELS rating system. And this is an acronym, stands for the things you can see, capital adequacy, assets, and so on. And the bank is rated as 1 through 5 in these areas, or credit union or savings and loan. And we are given ratings. And if your rating is not good enough, the regulators will constrain you from doing certain things and even go as far as potentially closing your doors. So it is very important that we talk about this not in technology terms, but in terms of how do we maintain compliance with FFIEC, and what can we as IT people and disaster recovery people and backup people do to improve the areas of CAMELS, particularly management capability, the M in CAMELS, where we are responsible and we can provide the most bang for the buck. And so when you deal with regulators, it's important to understand the workflow of a process that regulators and compliance folks and auditors are going to see. We'll focus on the DR one. What the regulators have always said to me and the auditors have always said to me, is the first thing we're going to look at is, do you have a plan? Is it a written plan that we can look at? The second thing they're going to always say is, are you following it? And the third thing they're going to say is, does it work? And the fourth thing they're going to say is it the right plan? And I've been told over the years that this is the order that everybody goes in. If you don't have it in writing, you're not going to pass an audit. If you can't demonstrate that you're following it, you're not going to pass the audit. And if you can't demonstrate the results, you're not going to pass the audit. And then we get into the more complicated and more subtle things like, is this the right plan? Is this the best plan? In terms of DR, we start with a written DR plan. We then talk about having our data storage plan. Obviously, without data, the bank or a financial institution grinds to a halt. So the first thing we've got to be doing is have a plan and have a mechanism for getting that data stored in backup media on-site and or backup media off-site. Then we've got to test our plan. And if you're like me, you're testing quarterly or perhaps even monthly, depending on if you service for others. You've got to share the test results, write them down, publish them, make them available to your internal auditors, external auditors, and regulators. You've got to look at what failed. You've got to build a remediation plan and see how you're going to improve it. And that gets written back into the plan, and the cycle starts again. And this is a never-ending cycle that we follow. And so it's very important that we talk about, and Ken will talk about this, how a good tool can help you as a CIO or Chief Risk or Compliance Officer or Auditor really get a handle on all the complexities of having to write this down, operate the test, look at the results, improve, and so on. So it's very, very important that if we can find a better way to do this, we will save you and your organization large amounts of money and large amounts of time. The next thing we're going to talk about is the types of disaster recovery. And when you look at disaster recovery sites, you've probably seen some, if not all of these. The most aggressive disaster recovery is done through what's called a mirrored site. In the old days, we had tandem computers processing credit cards, securities operations, and that sort of thing. And the goal there was we had no downtime. 5 nines, 6 nines, as many nines as you could put on it are what the global credit card switches, what the global wire transfer networks want to have. And that's a recovery time objective. And from a recovery point objective, or RPO, the goal is to have no data loss no matter what happens. Now, obviously, the cost of that is very high. That is essentially running every transaction twice, potentially even 3 times, twice in one site, once in the other, and being sure that you've got a majority rules, or at least you've got everything committed in 2 places. Very expensive, very limited purpose, and most of us, for most of our things, just don't find it cost effective. The more traditional that you'll see in DR for financial institutions is a hot site. Your recovery time objective is getting the system back up in 4 hours or less, and your goal is no data loss. It's not okay to have to lose transactions in your general ledger or subsidiary ledgers. And so we're willing to spend a fair amount of money on that, somewhat less than a mirrored site, but still pretty expensive. We move down to a warm site, which is 4 to 72 hours traditionally, and you're allowed to have some data loss. And when I say you can have some data loss, generally this means you've got paper records that you can use to rebuild transactions in the event of a problem. A warm site is slower and loses some more data, so you're willing to pay a little less for it, and that's the next level in the hierarchy. And then finally we have cold site, which is anything less than or more than 72 hours, and you're allowed to have some significant data loss. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've not seen an application that lives in a cold site that has anything to do with running our business. So we typically focus on mirrored, hot, and warm sites, at least in my experience. When we talk about DR, we talk about trade-offs. I've talked about recovery time and point objectives and costs. So let's look at the traditional curve. We have the vertical axis is recovery time, the horizontal axis is cost. Cheapest and slowest is off-site tape backup. You write the tape, we store it off-site. Kind of moving up this line, we then find that we're into appliance to do backup on-site. A little more costly, a little faster. After that, we can have site-to-site replication. We're copying the data to the other site, so it's there when we need to recover it. And as we walk up the chain, each thing gets more expensive, and each thing then gets faster in terms of recovery. But the significant thing is it all stays on that axis until today. The cloud lets us change the shape of that line, change the angle of that line. And I'll talk a little bit, and Ken will talk a lot more, why cloud-based disaster recovery as a service allows you to get faster recovery time at a lower cost and change the paradigm. So I like to talk about disaster recovery as being yesterday versus tomorrow. And it's kind of funny. Wait a minute, where's today? Well, as I say, I've been doing this for 40 years. And what we did 40 years ago with tape, today we might do with an appliance. So today is pretty much like yesterday, but a little bit faster, a little bit cheaper, but still every bit as complicated. And that's the challenge for us. So now we talk about moving into the cloud. I always hear, well, the cloud, that's future stuff, and besides, the regulators are never going to allow it. So if we take a look at the FFIEC guidelines around the cloud on the next slide, you will see that FFIEC has put out some guidelines about a year ago, and they highlighted 6 areas that are required for good control of outsourced cloud computing. I won't read them to you, that are there on your screen, but I'm going to point something out. They are exactly the same things that you would have to run any other IT operation. So what I take away from this is the FFIEC has recently, in the last couple of years, decided that the cloud is a perfectly acceptable way of operating our business and storing our data. When we talk about the cloud, I want to make a distinction. There are different kinds of clouds. They're not all the same. You can have a public cloud and a private cloud are the 2 big distinctions. There's another thing called a hybrid cloud, which just says you can't make up your mind. A public cloud is when somebody else operates the cloud for you and operates it as a large-scale business for other people. Amazon, Microsoft Windows, Azure, Google, and Infrascale operate public clouds. And private cloud is when you decide to put it together yourself, or you go to your local colo vendor, your local managed service vendor, and let them do it for you. I'll admit to a bias. I'm biased towards the public cloud. I think that when you look at the money that Infrascale invests, Amazon invests, Microsoft invests, and so on, in building these data centers, you've got to be one heck of a large institution to come anywhere close to what any of them spends on security, on audit, on their own DR, on redundant power and telecom and cooling. And so you've got a tremendous amount of power available to you at a very low price and in very small bites. Private cloud, you have this idea that, well, it's mine, I control it, I can put my arms around it. But we've been giving up control from the time we had managed services, we had colo, we had all these things we do to give some other vendor accountability for our operation. And so when we look at the cloud, I really suggest to you as a takeaway that you don't spend a lot of time on hybrid clouds or private clouds unless you're doing something very specialized, and you focus on all the advantages of letting Infrascale or Amazon or Microsoft do it for you. Let's talk about the next slide. This takes us to yesterday and tomorrow. Yesterday, we had slow, expensive, and very hardware-intensive backup. That picture is just slightly exaggerating what most of us have seen recently, but many people on the call may have seen this at some time in their career. We backed stuff up to tape, we carried it off in trucks, and quite frankly, we hoped we could find it all when it came time to run a disaster test, and even more so when it came to repair a disaster. And the cloud is bringing us to the era of tomorrow, when we can have fast, we can have affordable, and we can leverage all the values of the cloud vendors, the hyperscale cloud vendors, to give us these services. Now let's talk particularly about the benefits of disaster recovery as a service to the banks and the credit unions. Because it's the cloud, you can meet the needs of your members when a crisis strikes. The cloud is scalable, or some people say elastic. I can get more of it when I need it and less of it when I don't need it. As you'll see from Ken's presentation, using DRaaS allows you to easily meet your compliance audit and exam requirements. The cloud gives you tremendous recovery speed because you're living in data centers that are much, much larger than any individual credit union or bank could probably afford on their own. You can restore multiple branch offices if you have a regional disaster, a storm. I live in Houston. We have hurricanes, so if 20 of my branches are knocked out, I can do 20 recoveries at once without having to worry about I've only got one tape drive and they're all sharing it. Because it's the cloud, it's pay as you go. If you don't need it, you don't pay for it. And so that generates cost savings. And that gives you a lot of flexibility in the deployment. And there's a term, micro and macro disasters. Remember, we talk about disasters, we think hurricanes if we live in Houston, or earthquakes on the West Coast. We also have things that are micro disasters. That's the roof leaks and spills water into your servers. And so your data center is fine, but this bank of servers is down. So having the flexibility of the cloud and disaster recovery as a service, I can use one set of infrastructure tools to recover both inside my data center, micro, and outside of the data center, regional, national, macro disasters. And one thing that people don't often think about, in our industry, we're often acquiring. I know as a CIO, I'd often find out we were doing an acquisition when I read it in the paper. And then the challenge becomes you have 30 days to go pick up 50 branches, 100 branches. I once picked up 150 branches in 4 weeks in supermarkets all over Texas. And so how do you get your arms around that, and how do you build out an infrastructure that lets you grow that quickly? And as you'll see shortly, the cloud gives you that opportunity in disaster recovery and in running your operations. Now look, all vendors aren't the same, and there are key considerations you've got to look at when you pick a vendor. I will tell you that I'm very familiar with Infrascale, and I have a lot of trust and a lot of confidence in them. But these are the questions I think you should ask anybody, including Infrascale, when you're asking, are you the right vendor for me? And so the first question is, how is the data encrypted? Is it encrypted both in transit, on the move, and at rest? Can I easily test? It's very, very important in disaster recovery scenarios that you be able to test things and document your test results. So is the tool they're giving you got the ability to document and test and actually write that stuff down and say, yes, we passed and here's what happened. No, we had a problem and here's how we're fixing it. Can I look in one central place to get a pulse? One of the most interesting things about Infrascale is they back up and provide recovery for an enormous number of platforms. So if you're backing up laptops or other devices up through mini computers, servers, cloud-based tools, you can look at one place. One of the challenges I always face as a CIO was my mini computers, my mainframe computers, my cloud computing resources were all using different tools. And so I was having to put an amalgam of individual reports together to give a report to my auditor. Can you scale? A very important question if you're planning on growing, and many of us are. How do you scale the disaster recovery solution to handle your business growth? And the nitty-gritty is how long does it take to fail over your critical applications? If you've got a recovery time and recovery point objective, are you sure you're going to be able to meet them? Getting into a little more technical, we've got to worry about where are the VMs virtualized. Are they on appliances? Are they in the cloud? Or can you choose, or they choose, depending on the disaster type? And then lastly, and the way that you get happy with auditors, regulators, and even your own management is an audit log provided. Can you see that everything is being done the way it's supposed to and everything being done the way you say it's being done? If you remember early on in the presentation, I said, if it's not written down and you're not doing it, then you're not going to pass an audit. So this is very, very important that you have the audit log. You're going to hear an awful lot more about disaster recovery as a service coming up. Hope I've been able to set the stage for you as financial institution, credit union folks. I think the next thing is you're going to do a poll, so I'm going to turn this over to Carla. Carl?
Great, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, so before we pass it over to Ken, let's just do a quick poll here. So we're going to dive into the ransomware topic, and this poll here says, when it comes to ransomware, which of these is you? So you should see that poll up on the screen now. A is yes, I've been a victim of ransomware. B, no, I haven't experienced this type of security breach. Or C, I don't think I'll be affected by ransomware. Give everyone a moment to answer there. And it looks like we have 74% of you have voted so far, which is great. I'll go ahead and close the poll down and share those results. So we have 43% have answered A, yes, I've been a victim of ransomware. We'd love to hear more about that. You can use the question tool to type in some comments there and let us know what happened and what the outcome was. 57% B, no, I haven't experienced this type of breach. And 0, nobody answered, I don't think I'll be affected by ransomware. Great, so thanks for your participation there. I'm going to go ahead and hide the results here so we get that pull down and then pass it over to Ken.
Terrific. Okay, thanks, Carla, and thanks, Wayne, for that section. I always learn more every time you and I do a webinar together, mate. And so, Carla, if you can make me presenter. Hopefully that has worked. And so, just let me know, folks. Has that? Maybe we can get a comment from the audience, or Wayne or Carla, you can confirm for me that that's progressed onto the "What is ransomware" slide.
Yep, looks good, Ken.
Terrific. All right, folks. So as Wayne said, I'm going to talk a little about ransomware, and then talk to you about Infrascale's specific solution. You know, why talk about ransomware in the middle of a DR webinar for banks and financial institutions? Well, so we've all heard of ransomware. It's in the news. You know, the train shut down in San Francisco being just the most recent, horrible example of ransomware in the wild. But Wayne and I were chatting just before this webinar, and to me, there's a really big sea change going on in the DR world. Historically, we protected against the micro and macro failures that Wayne was talking about. Hurricanes if you're in Houston, or the motherboard goes out on one of your servers, that's a micro failure. We haven't really spent a whole ton of time focused on defending against directed attacks, right? Disasters were, generally speaking, kind of random events. But that's changed. In 2016, the most common disaster, quote unquote, that hit American businesses were ransomware attacks. So, that's a very different landscape to accidental events that are occurring. We've now got directed attacks that with an economic incentive behind them. And so it's impossible to talk about disaster recovery these days without talking about ransomware, right? That would be like talking about car insurance but not having anything for accidents, It's become the dominant topic in DR, frankly. And so just, some background. 2016 was really the year of ransomware. It's the year it became a multi-billion-dollar business. In Q1 alone, we paid out over $209 million in ransoms. Now, there are estimates out there that say that the actual cost to a business is usually 4 or 5 times the actual ransom amount, right? Because you're down, you can't work while you're waiting to pay the ransom. So not only will $1 billion in cold hard cash be paid out in ransoms, but the damage, the economic damage from downtime caused by ransomware is really just quite staggering and only growing, right? And if you think about that, if you think about the $1 billion being paid out, this is a disaster that is self-propagating, right? Every time one of those ransomware attackers, or hackers, that's what they are, successfully extracts ransom from someone, then that just encourages them to do more, right? So you've now got thousands of people around the world who are making this their living, working from their basement in Chechnya, wherever they are, buying toolkits on the internet and then running directed attacks against regulated businesses, primarily in the United States. And banks and financial institutions are just a massively obvious target, right? Because these are businesses that you just can't afford to be down in, right? So hospitals are also another one. And so the news is full of stories of these regulated businesses being affected by these directed ransomware attacks. And what's interesting is, ransomware isn't a brand new concept. It's certainly in the news lately, but ransomware's been around since the 80s. Right? So if you go all the way back to the dawn of the PC era, you had things like PC Cyborg, which would actually, go in and lock certain files on a computer, and then, a human would extract a ransom from a business. But of course, back then, the FBI or whoever was investigating, law enforcement, would do what they always do. They just follow the money. The bad guy had to extract a ransom, and the law enforcement officers could then just follow that money trail and generally arrest the guy, right? This all changed with the development of anonymous currency. So in my opinion, the number one contributing technological factor to the explosive growth of ransomware are anonymous currencies like Bitcoin and Ether. It's also been enabled by high-speed encryption algorithms and just the excess of computational power that's now sitting on our desktops. What do I mean by that? Well, if you go back to 95 and you had a Pentium 2 and it was sitting there encrypting your entire hard disk drive, you were going to notice that, right? Everything's going to grind to a halt. These days, with a modern multi-threaded processor sitting in your computer, ransomware could be sitting there encrypting your disk using, say, 2% of your CPU power, and you're not going to notice it. So you've got this confluence of factors, right? The development of new high-speed asynchronous encryption algorithms, the development of anonymous digital currencies like Ether and most famously Bitcoin, and then lastly, just excess computational power. It creates this perfect storm for ransomware attackers. And so I don't think we're at the beginning of this. Sorry, I don't think we're at the end of this. I think we're at the beginning of this. I don't think we've got solutions as an industry. I think this is only going to get worse. So even though 2016 is, sort of the year ransomware exploded, 2017 is going to be just as bad, if not worse, right? Unfortunately, that's part of my message here, is this isn't a topic you've got to get on top of. For the 57% of you who said you have not experienced ransomware, I'm sad to say that if we survey the same group 12 months from now, that number's going to be dramatically lower. Right. So if there's one thing you take away from my presentation today, it's look into ransomware and look into your preparedness. And your disaster recovery is a key element in your ransomware preparedness. So let's move on to what the heck do you do if you actually do get infected? Well, generally speaking, ransomware is going to enter your network at the edge. Okay, it's not going to infect a server first. It's going to come in through a laptop or an edge device. And so sort of there's a pretty basic concept, right? Number one, get the machine involved off the network so that it can't spread its payload to other nodes on the network. Number two, reset your BIOS time. By the way, this piece of advice actually only works about half the time these days. Number three, roll back. This is the key thing, right? What you really want to be able to do is turn back time to the minute or hour or day before you got infected by ransomware. And this is where DR and backup really comes into play, right? It's your ultimate ability to roll back. So traditional theory will tell you that when there's a ransomware attack, you've got two options: either pay the ransom or restore systems. And even paying the ransom these days, unfortunately, only works 50% of the time. So it's even paying the ransom is not a foolproof way to get out of trouble, right? But if you do go down that road, just be aware that you're not guaranteed to get your key back. You're not guaranteed to get your systems back. Some people recommend that you should just pay the ransom. We do not. What we recommend you do is roll back to, a snapshot just before you got infected. But that's quite difficult, right? And being certain that you can do that is quite difficult. So within the framework Wayne outlined before of have a plan, document the plan, test the plan, one of the things you've really got to plan for here is a ransomware attack, and you've got to test for your ability to roll back to an arbitrary point in time. Right, so if I told you, all right, you're infected last Thursday at 2 p.m., can you roll back your systems to last Thursday at noon, right? I'm going to look at how you can actually achieve that with modern tools. So let's unpack this concept of DR on demand, or DRaaS as it's called, disaster recovery as a service. The basic concept is to blow up the old recovery paradigm. The old recovery paradigm, we've all lived it. You get a phone call at 2 in the morning. The phone call always comes at 2 in the morning, and you're told that some key application is down and Europe can't do its work. So you get out of bed, you put your boots on, you jump in your car, you drive down to the data center, and you start copying data, right? Copying it from a tape array or a disk array, doesn't matter, but it invariably boils down to moving a whole bunch of data around, then reconfiguring some servers, then booting them up and praying that the application works. Well, happy to tell you, and by the way, I've lived this, right? So I've been the guy who gets the call at 2 in the morning a bunch of times, and happy to tell you that there are solutions now that mean that you don't have to go through that workflow anymore, and Infrascale sells one. So here we've got our happy state of users working away. We get the disaster. Let's say it's the ransomware attack, so everyone on the network is down because a core database has been encrypted, and therefore our apps are offline. What we're going to do with a good DRaaS solution is, instead of getting out of bed, putting our boots on, jumping in the car and driving to the data center, we're going to reach over and grab our nearest device. Maybe it's an iPad. We're going to log into the Infrascale recovery portal, right? We're then going to hit the play button, which is a button that kicks off an automated runbook, which has already been documented and tested, like Wayne was already talking about. So we automate all of that, right? And it's pre-tested, so we know the darn thing works. We hit the play button, and then within 15 minutes, and that's guaranteed, our applications are back up and running, and our users can get back to work. So that's sort of the promise of cloud-based DRaaS, is that with automation and runbooks and virtualization and cloud, we here at Infrascale, we can bring back your entire data center with up to 200 servers within 15 minutes or less, guaranteed, in the case of a disaster. And again, the most common disaster that we face as an industry is ransomware. So let's compare and contrast sort of backup and DRaaS, right? Because backup is still a viable solution. Now, Infrascale, we started in the backup arena, and we sell backup products, so I'm not here to sort of diss backup. But I will say that for regulated businesses and businesses where downtime matters, like banks and financial institutions, simple backup probably isn't the way to go anymore, right? I think DRaaS and on-demand failover is really where you want to be aiming. But if we look at backup, you've got your production data, and you pump that data across a wire to some sort of backup system. And I say across a wire because invariably backup means that you're copying large amounts of data over a wire, either to a tape array or a disk array or to the cloud. Then when ransomware attacks or any sort of disaster occurs, the process is to then go and find that data in the backup repository and copy it out to healthy servers, reconfigure those, and boot them. I'm going to try and use the draw tool here. I've never used this before. Let's hope this works. Here we go. So see this process here and this process here. And hopefully, maybe you all can type a question or post a comment to let me know this is working, but I've just sort of drawn on this slide. These two processes are incredibly lengthy processes, and they're processes that are driven as a function of the amount of data that you are trying to recover. Here's what's messed up about that. Firstly, it means that you cannot predict the amount of time it will take for you to get to here, right, which is booting and being happy. Secondly, it's inversely proportional to the amount of pain you're in. What do I mean by that? If all your servers are down, this job takes longer. Okay, so if it's one server and it takes an hour, if it's 10 servers, it's going to take 10 hours. Well, that's messed up, because if all 10 servers are down in your environment, that's when you're in the most pain, and that's when you need recovery time to be fastest, right? We actually need it to be inversely proportional, not linearly proportional. So the whole backup regime is kind of crummy when it comes to fixed time recovery or fast recovery. And yet 68% of corporate America is relying on backup technology as the cornerstone of their DR regime, right? Madness. So if we then flip over and we have a look at so the outcome of this can be days to actually get your system back up and running. Let's contrast this with the regime of Infrascale's DRaaS solution. Again, we're going to be protecting our production servers and copying them to the backup. So the actual top of this flow doesn't change. Where it gets very different is when you go to do that boot operation, right? Because with the whole concept behind our solution is we decided, instead of the user needing to copy data back out to new servers and then reconfigure and run them, what if we could just run the machines where they're being stored? So that seems like a simple concept, but just think about it for a second. If we're pumping all this data to a repository, why should we have to pull the data out of the repository to run it in case of failure? Why can't we just make that repository magical, powerful and capable of running our total environments? And so that's only possible when you're using cloud infrastructure, frankly, and that's what Infrascale's built. We've built a solution that allows us to run your machines right where they're being stored, which is how we can guarantee 15-minute failover no matter what disaster you're facing, whether it's ransomware or a hurricane. And so, now I need to figure out a way to clear the screen. Tell me if that worked. I think that should have then cleared all my scribbles from the screen. So now we're going to take a look at the Infrascale solution in particular and how it applies to to credit unions, community banks, and regulated businesses of all types. First thing I want you to know about us is we're not a Johnny-come-lately company. You know, we've been around for quite some time. We're protecting more than 1 million devices around the world with 55,000 customers on planet Earth. We're active in 172 countries, which makes us bigger than the United Nations. We have 900 distribution partners. Here on this diagram, each red dot represents a business that we're protecting somewhere around the world, right? So as you can see, we've sort of got a large global footprint. And by the way, folks, I can see the questions coming in on the questions tool. We are going to answer all of those. We'll just be doing it in the Q&A at the end of the presentation, so bear with us. And so our mission is pretty simple as a company. Our mission is to eradicate downtime and data loss. The global IT industry has done a lot of work to make, you know, productivity completely digital. Whether I'm running a bank, obviously it's all digital systems. Whether I'm writing music, it's all digital. Whether I'm a college student doing essays, it's all digital. Whether I'm a business doing pretty much every process these days, it's all digital. And yet the global IT industry has been absolutely lousy at making those systems resilient and impervious to data loss, right? If the IT industry were the car industry, we'd all be driving around in cars that go 900 miles an hour but have no brakes and no airbags. Because the IT industry is focused exclusively on productivity and has done hardly anything when it comes to resiliency and data protection. So that's where Infrascale steps in. And we've got generally 2 categories of offering, but when you buy from Infrascale, you normally just get everything on this screen. The first is cloud backup. The other is our push-button failover or DRaaS solution. Cloud backup, we recommend cloud backup for things like laptop fleets or small remote office and branch office environments. And we think that's very, very important. For server workloads and for mission-critical business workloads, we recommend our push-button failover, which is the Infrascale DRaaS or disaster recovery offering. And so Wayne also mentioned earlier that we've got quite a wide support footprint. We really focus on being able to protect everything. So this grid shows you, you know, what you can do, where you can do with our solution. And let's look at the columns. So these are the 4 different form factors you're likely to have: mobile devices, desktops and laptops, physical servers, virtual servers. And so we can protect all of these things. So whereas a VM might just work in the virtual servers category and just on VMware, you know, we work across virtual and physical, and within virtual we work across VMware and Hyper-V. Within physical servers we support Windows, Unix, and Linux. For desktops and laptops we obviously support both Mac and Windows. And so we really try and make sure that we support every device that you're going to have. You know, within reason, of course. Like we're not supporting mainframes from the 70s, although we are supporting some mainframes from the 80s. And then the rows here are slightly different. These are the use cases that we support. So push button failover is the DRaaS solution I was talking about, where you can just push the button and be back up and running. Cloud backup and recovery, this is direct to cloud backup and recovery for, like I said, laptop fleets and remote office, branch office. And then we also support long-term data archiving in the cloud too. Now at the bottom, you'll see these graphics. This is very important because these are the different options you've got as to where you want to send data when you work with us. You can use the Infrascale cloud. We've got 15 data centers around the world, and you can leverage that network. You can also use private clouds, but as Wayne said, that's probably only something you want to do if you've got a very specialized set of circumstances. You can use third-party clouds, so our technology will run on Amazon, it'll run on Google, it'll run on Microsoft Azure. Or lastly, you can buy our appliances and stick those in your own data center if you have a data center. So a lot of different options in terms of what we support on the front end and what target environments we support on the back end. In terms of encryption, you know, one of the things that's always baffled me in the data protection industry is that the backup guys, the data protection guys, have always said data encryption wasn't their job. So they've said, look, we protect the data, but then it's, you know, you've got to bring in a security company to secure the data. And we think that's like a bank or a credit union saying, we'll store your gold, absolutely, bring us your gold, but we won't lock it up. No, 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 that's someone else's job. Now, if a bank or a credit union said that to its customers, I mean, they'd be out of business in a week, right? So the idea that companies, data protection companies, will protect your data but not encrypt it, to me is absurd. So we've adopted the same standard that the US government uses for data security, which is called double-blind encryption. And it really just means this: before data leaves your premise, it gets encrypted with a key that you know. Then it gets pumped over the wire through an encrypted TLS tunnel. and then it gets stored on the back end in a second encryption bubble using a key that only we know. What does all that mean? It means this. To break into that data, to get that data, to make use of that data through a hack, you would need to have Infrascale's encryption key and you, the customer's encryption key. You'd need both. The chances of that occurring are geometrically lower than just getting a single one of those keys. So it renders things like social engineering attacks far less viable, right? It's a very powerful technique, and really you should ask any vendor, do you support double-blind encryption? And so the next thing is really pricing. So we haven't sort of gone through the pricing here, but Wayne alluded to it earlier where he said that the Infrascale solution gives you the equivalent of hot site failover for the price point of a traditional tape backup solution. So we've got very simple pricing that starts at around $150 per month per terabyte protected, with no limits on the number of machines or operating systems. It's very simple flatline pricing, and you saw before, our footprint covers nearly any system you're going to have. Some other things to highlight is all maintenance is included, all support is included. You don't need to buy separate support contracts. All of the hardware you need is supported. So if there's on-prem hardware required, we'll put that hardware right into your data center for you as part of the price. We're not going to nickel and dime you and make you buy different solutions. Unlimited testing. A dirty little secret of the DR industry is that most folks charge you to do DR tests to their platforms, which we think is absurd. So you can do an unlimited number of tests, which is important when it comes to compliance and being able to show your boss or being able to show your auditor that you are in compliance. Very powerful platform, very aggressively priced. What we're trying to get the word out. Using the cloud and clever software, you can now have hot site failover at about 1/10 of the price of what IBM will sell it to you. Right? So if in the past you've thought, hey, hot site failover is too expensive for me, I'm a small bank, I'm a small credit union, I can't possibly have a hot site. I want to blow that idea up, okay? You can, right? With the advent of new solutions like Infrascale's, it's now within reach from an affordability perspective. So sort of as we come into the last few slides here before the Q&A, just what makes Infrascale different? Well, the first big bucket is we're way less expensive than an IBM or a SunGard, even though we're giving you the same level of service, right? So with Infrascale, you can have IBM level of failover, that 15 minutes guaranteed. By the way, it's normally about 45 to 60 seconds, okay? We guarantee 15, but it's usually about 45 or 15 seconds. But we're doing this at the price point of a traditional tape backup solution, right? So what I like to say at conferences, we're 5 times faster than IBM at 1/5 of the price. So we're 25 times more value than an IBM DR solution. Push button failover, which just absolutely simplifies your life on recovery, but also testing and also audit compliance. You can show the auditors or you can show your boss the run book. You can show that it's all pre-scripted, pre-validated, and that it works. And you can demonstrate that it works anytime you like, right? You do 100 tests a week if you feel like it. And lastly, we're simplicity, right? It's one solution. You don't have to cobble together multiple solutions the way Wayne said he used to do. With Infrascale, you've got one solution, one platform that meets all of your needs. And so I think this, the power of this platform is why we're starting to win awards with industry press. So Gartner, the Gartner group you're probably familiar with, the world's most sort of respected IT analyst firm. Last year they named us their cool vendor for business continuity. And I always joke that that makes us the coolest company in the nerdiest category on planet Earth. And this year they've named us a top visionary for DR as a service. So in the DR as a service game, it's been dominated by the likes of IBM, who you can see here, or SunGard. But these guys will provide you with a product that works the same, gives you the same outcome we give you, but is dramatically more expensive. And by the way, the SLA they'll give you is probably more like 2 hours or 4 hours, not 15 minutes. So that brings us to the end of my presentation, folks. I hope you've learned a little bit about us, DR and ransomware. I know that listening to Wayne, you would have learned a whole lot about the regulatory frameworks facing you guys as IT professionals in financial services. Wayne, I want to thank you again, mate, for doing this. How do you feel about doing some Q&A now?
Sure, Ken. Love it.
So we've got this last poll, which we're going to put up on the screen while we do the Q&A, folks. So this poll will be up. Let's see if I can launch that successfully. There should be a poll on screen. And while we do that, we're going to go through these questions. And if they're for Wayne, just type in Wayne. If they're for Ken, just type in Ken. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions on the line here. So Bear with me. Okay. So the first question's from Kevin. It's, are there templates available to use as DR plans, as written? Wayne, I'll ask you if you know of any good sort of templates out there, and then I'll give the Infrascale answer as well. But Wayne, are there any sort of resources that you used to go-to resources for you when you were doing this?
Well, every organization I've worked for, if you have a person on your team that's in charge of DR, they'll want to write their own. That's my experience. But there are a couple of consulting firms, and I'll have to get names. Maybe I'll get them for you, Ken. We could post them on the website. Companies that sell templates. The problem is that you've got to pass your own audit, internal auditors, external auditors, and regulators. So it's kind of like the bank that doesn't protect your gold. This is a template written by somebody with no skin in the game. You probably want to work with your auditors, your compliance people, and work on a plan that they will accept, because the template can be beautiful. If it doesn't pass muster with your auditors, it's pointless.
Right, and I'll just add to that within the Infrascale portal there are a variety of templates. Now these are not templates that are tailored to the financial services industry, right? The generic templates, but they're a good starting point. And certainly, there's some pretty hardcore templates in there that you can use. Also, the ability of our tool to document and automate runbooks is a very useful supplement to whatever documentation you're putting together, because we've got this visual runbook orchestrator where you can literally show the workflows that are going to be executed. So that's quite neat. All right, next question is for Wayne. What's the typical frequency associated with testing within the DR workflow you showed? Quarterly tests, the industry norm.
Yeah, in my experience, we did quarterly tests. That's not because we wanted to do quarterly tests. That touches on a point Ken made. Tests are so bloody hard to do and fail so often. I'll tell you, in 40 years of doing tests, if I had 2 tests that succeeded 100%, I might be exaggerating. There was always something. I'll spend a minute, Ken. When you're not on a hot site, when you're not duplicating everything, and you have a warm site, what happens is you make a configuration change back to your primary disaster site or your primary data center. It never gets reflected because the documentation doesn't keep up. And so what works fine in production, as soon as you swing it over, an IP address changed, a database got moved, something got split, and so it stops working. Or you discovered that your engineers have cannibalized all your switches because they needed a bunch of cards for a new rollout project. So as a CIO, I would love to have monthly testing of my most critical applications. I would also like to be able to do a test just before the auditors arrive and say, here's an up-to-the-minute test. But in the traditional world of disaster recovery testing, we're talking about spending 4 figures, 5 figures, 6 figures to run a test. And so it's just not feasible. In the world of disaster recovery as a service and Infrascale, that model has changed, right, Ken?
Yeah, absolutely it has. And so, one of the things, and frankly, it was conversations with Wayne early on in our relationship together that really hit this home for us. We used to limit the number of tests a customer could do just because that was the industry norm. And it's working with Wayne where we've really come to understand the importance of documenting those test flows and documenting the proof that the test worked and making it real easy. So Wayne probably doesn't even know this, but he had an impact on our product, right? Because today what we say is unlimited tests, do as many as you like, whether it's for your boss, yourself, or the auditors. B, fully automated, pre-proven tests, so you avoid that thing that Wayne's talking about where you've got to make manual configuration changes, because Murphy's Law says whenever a human gets involved, the damn thing's going to break, right? So let's automate everything. And then the third thing is being able to spit out those workflows as documentation, because it actually becomes really powerful documentation for your DR, your written DR test plan. So there you go, Wayne. I don't know if you knew that you'd had that impact on our product teams, mate, but you have.
I didn't. I'm glad to hear that. I'll make sure to take advantage of that next time. But Ken, I do want to follow up that question. There's 2 points that are very important here. A large part of the cost of your disaster recovery initiative at a financial institution is proving to the auditors that you are doing it properly and doing what you said. And so the ability to generate a run book as more than just static documentation. You know, you write the book, you put it on the shelf, and now it's over here. And when it comes time to actually do the thing you're doing, people rely on cookbooks, they rely on their memory, they rely on the way they do it. And so just showing the auditor that you followed the documented procedure is traditionally quite difficult. With the Infrascale structure of being able to use the runbooks and build it into the tool, you're pretty much guaranteed that what you say you do is what you actually do, because it's one and the same. It's not just static documentation on a shelf somewhere. Right, Ken?
Bingo. Yeah. So it's not just, for us, the run book, the documentation actually becomes, it's executable, right? It's not just a book on a shelf, it is literally what gets executed. All right, we've got a...
You know, one more comment, because it's a big cost thing for people. Ask your compliance people, ask your audit department what they spend in getting these audits examined. If you can prove to the auditors that you know what you're doing, they will often substitute a cheaper test or use your internal resources and not have to charge you as much for the kind of comprehensive testing that they do if they're not sure you've got everything under control. So you may discover that buying a tool that has this kind of documentation and testing allows you to cut your audit bill. You know, that may not affect the IT budget at all, but it sure as heck makes the CFO and the board quite happy.
Okay, so it looks like that was the last question. Any other last-minute questions, please do feel free to get those in now. But we did announce that giveaway at the beginning of the webinar for the person who asked the most on-topic questions. And we still have lots of questions coming in now. So Ken, are there more questions there that you wanted to go through?
Absolutely. So why don't you keep tallying for the prize, and we'll just spend a few more minutes here answering these questions because we've still got a few minutes. So I'm gonna move a bit faster, folks. The next question is, which DR site type's the most common? Hot sites? No, not at all. The most common DR site type is no DR site type, right? It's just cold storage, and then the second most common would be a warm site because they're cheaper. Not many, as Wayne said earlier, very few people can afford you know, a synchronous hot site. Now, the benefit of something like Infrascale is we give you warm site functionality at the price point of cold storage. So I think that's frankly one of the coolest things about Infrascale and other DRaaS solutions is that price performance mix. 15 minutes guaranteed failover at the price point of a backup solution. Next question is, which cloud option is most secure and meets the DR standards put in place by banks and credit unions? Look, theoretically, the most secure is going to be a private cloud environment because you can control everything. But as Wayne said, in practice, that's never the case because you don't spend the amount of money that we spend or Amazon spends or others spend on making that infrastructure bulletproof. So, excuse me, and I shouldn't say bulletproof. Nothing is bulletproof. But I'll wager that the Infrascale environment is, you know, massively more secure than any private cloud environment in corporate America out there, right? So I would recommend that you look at major third-party public clouds like Amazon or Google or Microsoft, or you look at third-party public clouds that specialize like Infrascale. So the Infrascale cloud is not the type of cloud you would use to do a video sharing website. But when it comes to DR, I'd argue it's probably the best cloud on earth to use, right? So you've sort of got either these large third-party general cloud infrastructures, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, and then smaller public cloud specialized infrastructure and specialized clouds like us. The next question is, what's the estimated ransomware cost of 2017? No way to answer that yet, right? We're waiting on data to come in, but if it was $1 billion in payouts in 16, you know it's going to be more than that in 17, right? This problem is only accelerating. So I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being $3 billion in 17, but that's pure conjecture, right? I don't have anything to back that up other than the fact that it is certainly escalating. Next question is, 15-minute recovery time is extremely fast. I heard Wayne say the 15-minute recovery time is guaranteed. What does the guarantee cover? The guarantee is pretty broad. So we guarantee we'll bring up all of your computers in 15 minutes or less. for up to 200 machines, right, within a single account. So if you've got 500 machines, you would need to buy more than just a default solution, but a default solution will handle up to 200 computers in 15 minutes or less. Okay, a question here from Lyndon saying, so why would it take you 15 minutes to fail over if the cloud has everything? Why is it not instant? Lyndon, great question. First, I want to say that most vendors are going to guarantee you 2 hours or 4 hours or 24 hours, okay? So the fact that we're guaranteeing 15 minutes is unheard of in the industry. Secondly, here's why. Those machines aren't sitting there running and working. They have to be decompressed, decrypted, rehydrated, injected into a hypervisor, internetworked and booted, okay? And that takes time. There are solutions out there where the machines are running hot, but that's a hot site, and you're back to the crazy cost structures of, you know, of the bad old days. When I say the bad old days, I'm talking about 2015 and before. So the benefit of our solution is, you know, it's not incurring costs when you're not using. Wayne said it earlier, with cloud, you know, you're not paying unless you're using. Well, that is true of Infrascale. Unfortunately, it's not true of a lot of cloud vendors. So with us, it usually only takes 45 seconds to 60 seconds, like a minute, to get you back up and running. And with that guarantee of 15 minutes, we've built in some buffer for ourselves, to be honest. But yeah, so it's not quite instant, but it is. But the main thing is it's performed with a warm site failover solution, you know, at a fraction of the price point. So another question here, with a DRaaS solution, would you also recommend traditional backups to a NAS as well? No, I wouldn't, Lyndon. Well, let me rephrase. If you're using Infrascale, no, I wouldn't, because backup is already included and so is archiving. So with Infrascale, you're always going to have multiple redundant secondary copies of your data. You don't need to go and procure a NAS. With other solutions, you would need to. So this is one reason I would recommend working with Infrascale is, you know, having your own additional system isn't required. Next question is, what's the average size of the financial institution or credit union that the Infrascale DR program supports? Kevin, most of our customers seem to be within between like, I want to say 500 employees on the low end and a few thousand employees on the high end. We've certainly got some, you know, very large companies with tens of thousands of employees. You know, one of the big 4 accounting firms on planet Earth is one of our customers. So we have really big customers, but we like to focus on mid-sized companies. We feel like we bring unique, you know, value for money for mid-sized organizations. So that's where we focus. Next question is, seems risky to allow one company to service a DRaaS. If something happens to that company, servers, where would the VM be stored? So translating that, the real question is, what happens if Infrascale goes belly up? This is why we support third-party clouds, Lyndon. So, you know, if you're worried about that, then you could really run our technology on top of Amazon or Microsoft or other systems, right? So now I don't think you need to worry about that. But if you were, then you can use our tech on big third-party clouds. Question here, how long has Infrascale been in business? Since 2010, so 6 years. How fast can I restore from a cloud backup? Say 60 megabit pipe and a terabyte of data. Look, there are calculators out there on the internet that would do that math for you quicker than I can. 60 megabits is a pretty fast pipe, and a terabyte is not an awfully large amount of data, but off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that. All right, so I'm just going to go rapid fire here, and then we'll announce the prize winner. How do I move forward with the demo? Just type into the questions tool, I'd like a demo. Also, if in the poll you selected yes, I'd like to hear more, someone's going to follow up with you. Next question is, this is a great webinar, thanks for presenting. Okay, terrific, our pleasure. Another question, are there any extra costs when I fail over to my DR server on your systems? How long can I run my servers on your systems before I must switch back? Great question. No, there are no hidden costs, and again, that's different to the industry. Most folks in the industry do nickel and dime you right then. Right when you're down, that's when they hit you. So we don't charge you any extra, and you can leave those systems running, you know, on the cloud side for as long as you need to. There are some fine print restrictions that it's a very long period of time. Some people limit it to 24 hours. Like Datto charges you, $100 an hour after 24 hours. With us, it's weeks and weeks. The only real thing we're trying to stop people from doing is running production workloads there permanently. So it's weeks and weeks and weeks, and I'll get back to you with a detailed answer, Corey. And that brings us to the end of the Q&A. So we're going to pass it back to Carla here in a second to announce the winner and any other last housekeeping things. But Wayne, I just want to thank you again for your time, mate. Always wonderful to have a true industry expert like you join us, and I hope the audience has really gotten a lot out of it.
I enjoy it, and I encourage the audience. My Twitter address is in there. If the audience wants to interact, let's keep doing it. There are a couple of keywords. Let's take advantage of them.
Absolutely, and just to remind everybody of Wayne's details, they're here on screen. Well, I hope they're here on screen. I think I've got to close the poll first. And so Wayne is at Wayne Sadin. His LinkedIn is linkedin.com/IN/Wayne Sadin. And I'm at Kenshaw JR. And I think you can also talk to us using @Infrascale. The hashtags we set up, I believe, are on the next slide, or maybe the previous slide. Oh, I'm bad at this, aren't I? There we go. So the hashtags we set up were #DRaaS and #BDR. So please do join in the conversation. And with all of that, I'm going to throw the ball back to Carla. Carla, catch.
Great. Thanks, you guys. That was a great presentation, and thank you, everyone, for being here today and for your time. So I wanted to announce the winner of that giveaway. Again, we were doing a giveaway for the person who asked the most on-topic questions, and that was Kevin Arkin. So congratulations, Kevin. Keep an eye out for an email from me this afternoon with further details. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Wayne and Ken, great presentation. Really appreciate it, and we look forward to working with all of you soon. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.